You're listening to the Weekend Sport Podcast with Jason Pine from News Talk ZB.
In a significant move to bolster the support and development of performance sport coaches here in New Zealand, Te Korowai Sport Performance Coaches New Zealand has been officially launched this week. It aims to represent, connect, celebrate and support coaches right across the country, addressing a critical need identified by the coaching community itself. Te Korowai emerged from discussions during a coaching accelerator course run by High Performance Sport New Zealand, where a group of coaches highlighted the absence of a dedicated representative body. Former Black Caps coach Mike Hesson is one of Te Korowai's inaugural board members. He joins us now to talk about this and coaching in general. Tell us about the need, first of all, Mike, for a body like this.
You know, all parties in professional sport have an outside representative, I guess. If you think from a Players Association perspective, players in professional sport having someone to advocate for them, somebody to identify and look after their well-being, and that obviously covers many different aspects. And it basically gives you a voice somewhere where you can get some external independent advice. And it's a profession. You know, being a professional coach literally is your career, and like any body, whether it be police or nurses or whoever it is, you know, there's some independent advice. And I think there's so many examples you would have seen, even just within New Zealand coaches where coaches have been through tough times, and generally when they're having tough times is when it even gets harder, and people want to, have a crack at you or whatever. And sometimes, the coach's well-being can be challenged. So, we identified, many coaching groups identified a real need for it, and it's somewhere that around the world there are professional coaching bodies where coaches are supported and looked after, and it's great that New Zealand have, we've been able to put something in place because it's been talked about for a long time, but great to have it in place now with Te Korowai.
So what do you perceive Te Korowai will provide coaches on a day-to-day or more likely an as-needs basis? What will that support look like?
Yeah, I think more an as-needs basis, really. I think that, like, for example, when I talk about well-being, there'll be some screening there. I mean, a lot of coaches, like athletes, have access to sports psychologists or whatever to help them through some challenging times. And, that's one aspect where, we have someone incredibly talented in place that can screen coaches and then direct them to where the need exists. Because often when you're going through tough times, you don't really know what you need. And as I said, to have someone outside of your employer, who often is in a difficult situation because they are, they're employing both the player and the coach, and their loyalties are challenged as well in terms of who they look after. And as I said, often the athletes have the support and the coaches don't. The coaches are often left out to, take it or leave it scenario. It's professional sport, and they talk about coaches, and it's in many ways it's real, isn't it? You're either being fired or you're waiting to be fired, and that's the existence of many coaches and how they feel about their job. And we want to change that. Even just getting coaches around in the same room and talking about some of the challenges that we face, and having, it's not so much just a whole heap of coaches, it's having coaches that have coaching as a career and the challenges that you're surrounded with. So, to have, as I said, a body that you can talk to. There'll be a lot of resources that go out. We'll celebrate coaches, those that do well, celebrate the success of coaches, give them, lots of opportunities to meet, whether it just be within your own region. So there'll be a collective group where we, send, whether it be expert in a certain area around these different regional bases, and there'll be an annual event where coaches get together. There'll be a number of different mechanisms for support.
Prior to this body coming into being, anecdotally and also in your own lived experience, Mike, where do coaches typically look to for support when they need it? Is it from their assistants? Is it from their, people outside the sport? What is most common?
I think that it's really hard to do it from within your sport because often you're often competing for the same jobs. So I always found when you went to, say in my sport, if you went to a cricket conference, where you were sharing ideas and you listen to things, often coaches are very guarded because there are only certain jobs and that's their livelihood. So it can become a little bit of patch protection, whereas, I was lucky enough to be part of the Coach Accelerator program where we had people from 6 different sports, and it was an amazing experience where you could actually be vulnerable and you could say, hey, these are some of the challenges I've faced, these are some of the mistakes that maybe I've made. What would you do in this situation? And go through some case studies and learn off each other. And that was a real support for me in terms of, Alex McKenzie was running that program, and he's, a very, intelligent man, was able to sort of ask the right questions and put a group together that were able to learn off each other. And pretty much every one of those coaches have gone on to achieve some pretty cool things. So, and I, always value that support, that collegial support that we had.
Is professional coaching still an attractive proposition? As we've been chatting for a while now, and there's obviously the need for a body like Te Korowai, but do you think becoming a professional coach is still attractive to people?
Oh, I think it is, absolutely. I mean, it is an amazing career, but it has its challenges, and I think that's a big part of Te Korowai is to go, well, look, we've been well aware of these challenges for ages, but we haven't been able to support coaches. So therefore, coaches tend to go up through the pathway, they reach the top and they have a bit of a bad run, and then they get fired and then they stop coaching. And that's the last thing that we want. I mean, we have a small body of excellent coaches in New Zealand amongst all sports, and what we want to do is make sure that, there's only one person who could potentially coach the national team at that time, but there's a heck of a lot of coaches that are required amongst the sports. And we want coaches, once they see it as a career, and once they've been a national coach, they might have worked out that that's not for them, or they might have been told that's not for them, but they still love coaching and they still see coaching as a career. So it's about, I guess, repositioning them and making sure that they do feel like they have a career. And part of this Te Korowai is actually, in that moment of need, is just trying to, I guess, reposition and give some clarity around where to next.
Is there any way to break the cycle of coaches being sacked by sporting bodies who are seeking instant gratification?
Yeah, it's a good question, Piney. I don't think there is an easy fix, because I think, many people that employ coaches are on boards and so forth, and I'm on boards myself. A lot of people that do the employing don't actually understand the job. So, they just understand the outcome. They don't really want to understand or even hear about there's a potential process involved in winning. I think that's, if you've got a coach that's really stable in their role and they don't feel like they're on the edge all the time, then they'll be better coaches, and the athletes will get a better coach as well. I think that the last thing a player wants is a coach feeling like they're on edge and they're every game they're playing for their job, because then they put the pressure onto the players and it becomes a pretty horrible environment. And I don't think many boards ultimately want that, but that's often what they do. So, I think it's a board situation where they actually need to spend time making sure they appoint the right coach and then actually supporting them.
How do you deal with the great irony of sport in that once a game starts, you really can't do anything as a coach except trust your players to follow the game plan you've put in place? How do you deal with that irony?
Well, I think that you understand it, therefore you use the week really wisely. You use the time away from the game really wisely to educate your players to become really good decision makers and, problem solvers, because that's your job as a coach. It's not just about putting a strategy in place. It's not just about working on tactics or technical. It's about helping your players become very good problem solvers, so that in the heat of battle, when they are into the pump and you know that tough decisions are made, more often than not, the right ones are made, because you've done the what ifs, you've put your players through different scenario trainings and you've had your opportunity to coach. And then you got to trust them. That is the best part, I reckon, is that you know you've done the work and you actually allow players to make mistakes in that situation, because that's a part of the process. And once they start doing that and they start taking accountability for it, and you can do some shared learning off the park, then you've got to live with the fact that the result will be the result. And, that's part of your job.
Once you reach the elite level as a coach, how much of coaching, Mike, is mental? Is getting into the minds of your players, pushing and pulling the right levers, making them better at decision-making, that sort of thing? Because I would imagine that you're not needing to teach a top-quality batsman how to play a cover drive. Is it mainly mental once you get to the very top?
Oh, look, it's actually about building relationships. It's actually about getting to know the player and what makes that player tick. How you can add value to that player. And I think once you understand that, your job is actually to maximise talent. Your job is to help that player be the best player they can be. Once you appreciate that, then you do whatever's required. And sometimes it is technical, sometimes it's tactical, sometimes it's mental. Sometimes it's about getting that player to buy into what the team requires. Sometimes it is about helping them make a little shift that's going to make them a better player as well. So, it's a combination of many of them, but yeah, it's certainly not, you're not in that position because you've only got one of those skills, that's for sure.
I just want to finish with an actual example. You talked about coaches who go through challenging times. So look at the Crusaders at the moment. Challenging time for them, for Rob Piney. They've lost a few players, but they've also lost a very successful coach. Is it possible to know whether their results would be different if Scott Robertson was still Crusaders coach?
Oh, I think it's very difficult to tell. I mean, there have been so many changes. It's not just one person's left and everything else is the same. It's, there are so many variables. And I think it's probably a really good example of where a coach is obviously going through some challenging times. And what tends to happen is that's the perfect opportunity for people to put the boot in. And that's the perfect opportunity. When very rarely do people put the boot in while coaches are flying, where they're in a position of strength. And sometimes that's where you can start to question yourself, because it's coming at you from all angles. And that's where having a perspective and a support like Te Korowai will actually bring some clarity to that situation. It won't solve all the problems, but it will at least bring some clarity and help the coach if they need some support. Because I think to put the blame on to one person is unreasonable. And as I said, I think it's a bit of a cheap shot.
So if you were sitting down with Rob Piney to chew things over, if it was in an official capacity through Te Korowai, what would that conversation sound like?
Oh, I think you'd just talk really in terms of how you going, what are your bigger issues at the moment? Where are the pressure points? Are you actually able to do your job? Do you think you're doing your job as well as you can? I think just loads of questions and just trying to get to know what the actual issues are. And often I hear some of his players coming out and saying he thinks he's doing a great job. And look, he could well be. And that's the thing, is that when you're talking to that coach, you actually need to get a really big picture around what the issue is. And the issue, as I said, the coach might be struggling with a couple of players. The coach might be battling that, in fact, he doesn't feel like he's got support, so he's always second-guessing himself. The coach, it could be so many different issues. So I guess it's just trying to find out what the major problem is and how you can offer some help and support. I don't know. I think it's just having a conversation and having a safe space where the coach can actually be a little bit vulnerable.
Good stuff, Mike. Hey, thanks for joining us and giving us the rundown on this new body, Te Korowai, which is going to help elite coaches by offering support to them. Really appreciate your time, mate, and I hope that Te Korowai goes really well, because it feels to me as though it's a gap that has needed filling.
For more from Weekend Sport with Jason Pine, listen live to News Talk ZB weekends from midday or follow the podcast on iHeartRadio.